We will be holding this talk together, me and Becca. I will start off with some more information about Recogito. That's the tool that I already presented briefly on Monday. And then Becca will go more sort of widely, I would say, into terms of geovisualization in general, also speak about story maps, and I think you're also going to show some interesting things that have been done from sort of the community that we're working with. Yeah, I call this talk Maps and Geovisualization, or Traveling Through Space and Time with Data, because it's really like a time machine if you have the right tools to look at your data, your geohistorical data. So there will be some time machine references in there. What will the session be about today? So as I said, it will be first about geo annotation with Recogito. That's the continuation from Monday, and this time you will also get a chance to actually play with the tool yourself. It will be about maps a lot, of course, about something called places and traces, and Becca will speak about what that is, about stories, yeah, and as I said, time machines, because it's truly like a time machine, having the ability to look at your data through visual tools. So, just as a small reminder from Monday, Recogito is a web-based annotation tool for texts and images, and actually it's also an annotation tool for tabular data, just because I was reminded before that in Pelagios you can upload spreadsheets, so maybe I'll just take on a little demo of how it works. It's sort of a beta demo, it's a beta functionality in Recogito, that's why I didn't officially put it on the slides. But maybe I'll show this briefly, because this is also a way, if you have a table with place names, Recogito would also allow you to get coordinates for those place names. It is open source software. That means you can download the tool and install it yourself, but it is a server-based thing. So you would need to sort of have a little bit of familiarity with server administration, so it's not quite straightforward as installing a desktop tool. So we also offer a public instance at recogito.pelagios.org. That's sort of the main instance where everybody can go and get their account. For this workshop today, we have also set up a special instance at the Austrian Academy, and that's hosted here at recogito.acdh-dev.oeawacat. So that's an instance where basically no one works at the moment, and that's just for this workshop. And we're also going to use it. Right. I don't want to talk about the background too much. You've already seen the demo anyway, so I want to give you right now the chance to play with it. So Stefan has recommended some sample files that would make for a nice demo from the Ministerratsprotokolle dataset. And we're going to look into this. So first of all, it doesn't work on Internet Explorer, so if you can, please use Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. So those are all supported. And the first thing I would ask you to do, please, is to visit this address that I've spelled out here and register for an account. Let's see, I will guide you through the steps here. So this is what you see when you come to the instance. This one here should say help. Yeah, that's some tiny configuration issue on your instance. I can help you sort it out later. But basically, you just have to pick a username, pick an email address. As I said, that's just kept for sending password reset things. Pick a password, and you have to check this box down here. You can read our license. That just explains what we stored and how you can delete it yourself. So, does everybody who wants to follow on have an account already? Okay, I can see some nodding. I'm also going to log in. So this is roughly what you see when you are logged in. In your case, you will only have this one here, a small welcome document, which is simply a text file which has a little bit of explanation and allows you to play around. So you can just try it out, how annotation works. But what we actually want to do So I would ask you to please visit the following URL. So it's the same base URL, but /Rainer at the end. You should see something that sort of resembles this, at least these 4 documents. These are 4 documents from the Ministerratsprotokolle, which I have shared, so everybody can get access to them, everybody who has an account in Recogito. And you can just open any one of them. Yeah. And what I would ask you to do, because in order for you to have your own copy of the document, which makes more sense if you're annotating, I would ask you to clone the document to your own workspace. So if you go back to this /Rainer workspace, so my shared workspace, and you select one document, you can just pick one at random. You have a button up here which says clone to my workspace. So I would ask you to click that button, and after a while, you get a copy of that in your own workspace. So if you now go back to your workspace, there's a link at the top if you're logged in. In your own workspace, you should now have a copy of the document. Did that work? Okay, yeah. And now, I would say feel free to explore. Sorry, it's not. Some things that you can try. First of all, you can create a comment, which is simply a text comment. Try to create a tag, and try to create a geo-resolution. Tags, by the way, you can use your own vocabulary, so there is no preset vocabulary. You could say that's like an official person. You hit enter and they create the tag. And as soon as you've created a tag, yeah, you can reapply it. So if the same phrase appears again in the document, you say, yes, I want to reapply this tag also to other occurrences of the word Staatsminister. And if you scroll down, you will find hopefully other occurrences. I'll find it when you're here. And it will also have been applied. Also, when you use tags, you have autocomplete. So as soon as you've created a tag and you start typing the tags, you will get suggestions on the tags that you've already used. So you can start building up your own tag vocabulary this way. Has anyone tried tagging something as a place already? Okay. So I'm just repeating this quickly here. Let's say Bohemia. For those who haven't tried it, so the system works based on gazetteers. So there need to be gazetteers in the system that have lists of place names and the coordinates for them. In this case, I also uploaded the HistoGIS, the gazetteer, which is from the Austrian Academy. And that's very suitable for this data set because it actually has a lot of places that appear in those documents. In this case, if we take Böhmen, Bohemia, it will already suggest Königreich Böhmen from the gazetteer. So let's just confirm this. This one. So as I've learned, that's one place, Galizien und Lodomerien. It's another kingdom. And then of course, that's a nice example here. Österreich unter und ob der Enns. That's one place name in a way, but it's two places. It's Upper and Lower Austria, roughly. So if we take this as a place, it won't find something initially because that's not in the gazetteer. In this case, you could try search. Let's try just unter der Enns. And in this case, we do actually find matches. That's Erzherzogtum Österreich unter der Enns. Unfortunately, we don't show all the properties from the original gazetteer. That's different feature types. I think the one would be, I mean, you probably know this, Stefan. One would be...
Perhaps it's different times.
For different times.
Yes.
No, we actually should show this. Yeah, I'm sorry. Right, so it has two records in the gazetteer. Okay, yeah, we need to make sure this appears. I'm just picking one. And because it's two places, you can it's perfectly fine to add another place, another tag. And then now let's take ob der Enns, another thing. Lower Austria, Salzburg.
No, Salzburg is a separate Erzherzogtum.
Okay. Still ob der Enns. Okay, so now you have added two places to a single text passage, so it's also possible. And if you go to the map view, you already have your kind of the places that you already mapped. And if you click on them, you will also see the text passages where you've created those tags. Right. What else can we do? Yes, highlighting the coloring options maybe and creating a relation. That's something that's interesting. So in many cases, of course, you will be tagging different things. You will be tagging people, you will be tagging events, you will be tagging any kind of concept really that appears in your text. Let's just take this person as this one as a person. HST. What you will see, unfortunately, we can't resolve people to a sort of topographical dictionary yet. That's something that we would like to add in the future. But resolving against the vocabulary only works for places at the moment. But hopefully that's going to change it. Right, let's mark some HST occurrences. Then there's this relations tool. In the toolbar, you find something that's called relations. And once you switch to that, you'll see that your annotations will get like a little boundary around them. And it can click once. Either you click once or you click and hold, and then move your mouse, and you can connect different annotations to each other. Let's say, click this, and then the kind of connection that exists, you can also apply a tag to. Let's say he's the ruler of, I can't really think of a good example. But this way you can sort of, it's basically like in a book, when you just have a highlighter and a pen, and you can just do highlights, and you can create arrows between them. Yeah. That's how the thing works. Another thing, maybe the coloring could also be interesting. At the moment, you can see the coloring of the tags by the type. That means the blue ones are people, the green ones are places. If you have an event, that's going to be purple. And everything that's not a place, a person, or an event is just yellow. So that's sort of the generic color. But you can also color them by status. That means if they have been confirmed. So in this case, I click this confirm button for the place, so that makes it green. But if I mark a place and say it is a place, and it's the Steiermark, which looks good, but I just click OK without actually confirming it, it stays gray. So the green ones will only show you what has been confirmed by the user. And finally, that's also quite nice, you can color it by the tag. So this kind of orange here is everything that was colored with the name Majesty. The blue thing has been tagged with official person. Actually, if you hover over it, you don't need to click on it. Of course, you can also add multiple tags. In this case, the color won't change because the color only works on the first tag, but at least you get some kind of small notification that this has multiple tags. And if you hover over it, it will show you. Right. Again, we've already seen the map. If you look at this toolbar, there is another thing called Annotation Statistics. That is kind of minimal, but it will give you at least some kind of insight into the types of annotations that were created. It's definitely not as rich as doing your own analysis, and you can download the data and do that, and we'll show it we'll look at this in a minute. This kind of is a light overview, which might be useful if you're working with a group of people, because you can also share your document, and then you can see how many people have done edits on there, what's the percentage of places versus tags, things like that. The activity over time, so that this becomes a timeline, how many edits have been done every day, especially in classroom work where this is being used a lot. This is kind of useful because the teacher can give an assignment to students, and like 2 weeks later, she looks in and will see who has done what, basically. You will also see the entities that you have tagged, whether there were places that have the same place but different names have been used. So if you're looking for different name variants, you can put that out here. Also small statistics on tag use, things like that. Yeah, what else? Of course, this is a tool for data generation. What you really want to do in the end is take the data out and analyze it somewhere else. And this is accessible via this point here in the main menu, download options. So if you look there, you get all the options that are available. The easiest one is to download a spreadsheet. So that's just an Excel file where you have, this is the ID of the annotation. These are the users that have contributed to the annotation, place name, annotated text passage. So that's kind of a long tail of things that, that you have done in the annotation, just represented as a spreadsheet. The full version, if you really want all the data in the same way as it is stored in Recogito, you would have to pick the JSON LD download. That's basically RDF, represented as JSON. So that has everything in a standard format called the Web Annotation Model. There is actually an official standard for annotations on web resources by the W3C, by the World Wide Web Consortium. So that's this. That also is a means of making it compatible with other annotation tools. Frankly, there are not many annotation tools for texts that use it. I'm actually not aware of a single one. But when we move to images, that uses the same standard, and there are more image annotation tools. So you can create annotations in Recogito on images and then view them in other annotation tools that support the same standard. GeoJSON is another format that's a standard for just the maps. So if you want to build your own web map, or if you want to look at the data in a geoinformation system in a tool like QGIS, that's the kind of format that would be useful here. Also KML might be a format you've come across. That's the format from Google Earth. So again, it's a way of taking your data and opening it in a different way.
I can ask a question.
Yes?
So if I download the GeoJSON, would the GIS shapes come along and use for annotation?
I think so. Let's try it. Yeah, polygon. So it does the shape, it includes the shape. It's a big one because it's one of the. And it says Königreich Galizien, so that's the title from the Gazetteer. Here's the URI from the Gazetteer. Yeah. And it has one annotation. It doesn't really say more about the annotation. But yeah. And maybe the most interesting thing is TEI. As I said, you can upload a TEI file. Like in this case, that was a TEI file. If you download that, you will get, let's try this. I have no idea. It's kind of, I normally don't work on Windows. At least I should be able to see the notepad. No, that's all right. Cheers.
Das ist ja schon mal so. Nur das zweite Teil.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. So basically, you get the original TI back.
Without the parse names.
Without what?
Without the parse names.
Yeah, that's right. But that's I actually before the workshop started, I deleted those. So that's totally on me. It's not the tool. It was me. But let's see. We have text down somewhere here. Yeah. Here's the stuff that we created just before, that I created just before. In this case, it's a person name. It gets an internal ID, which is sort of in the list up there. And here are the tags that I created, a majesty and another tag. And probably, or we also can find a place name somewhere.
There should be Galitzinen oder Mähren im Grunde.
Yeah. So here, it's Bohemia. The cert tag is because I confirmed it. We were told that this is sort of at least one way to encode confirmation in TI. And here the ref will be the URI to the His2Gis gazetteer. So that also gets included into the TI. Right. Other things to look at. Yeah, maybe sharing a document and then trying name entity recognition. That's something I like to show. So if you have other people you want to work with, that's all here under the settings. You can only see this in your own documents. That's also why I ask you to clone it so that you have your own document, because if it's a document that somebody else shared with you, you can't access the settings for the document. But basically, if you go to the settings, you have a short sidebar with various options. On the one hand, you have several metadata fields. It's not particularly rich, but at least will help you get organized. You can add a title, an author, a freeform date, things like that. You can also add a license. That's important for sharing, because if you want to make it open to anyone, you have to set an open license. You can use this as fake now, more or less.
But all this data is already in the TI file, in theory.
Yeah, okay. It's not being passed from TI file. And then under sharing, or freigeben in German, you can either add other users. So if you know their username, in this case, I can add Becca, for example. And I can give her different permissions. Like read permissions means she will see the document, can open the annotations, but she won't be able to add her own annotations. But with write, she can create her own annotations. Or you can make it completely public. The options are either anyone on the web, which means if you go to my workspace, the /Rainer workspace, you will actually see it in the list. Or you can say anyone with the link. In this case, it's also open. And if I email you the link, you will be able to open it, but it won't be listed publicly on. So people won't be really finding it if they don't know the link. So that's the difference. Right, and the final thing that I still wanted to show, and I think that's something you can try out, but it's a little bit beta, especially for TI files. Let's just clear the annotations. I'm deleting all my annotations now so that we can start with a blank sheet. And you can run named entity recognition, which means you can automatically detect place names and person names. So it's here. So if you select it, and if you go to options, the last point here is named entity recognition. Let's pick that. And then first you will get different options for the engines. In this case, so the only things that are installed on this instance are Stanford, which is sort of one of the most popular open source named entity recognition engines. It has different language models. I'm going to use the German one because we have German text. And in this case, I would like to only use His2Gis, maybe, for example, to resolve the places. So, and you can click start, and this can take a while, especially for long texts. It might take a while to parse. Basically, it's now loading the text. It's going through the text with this language model. It's tagging people and person names. And then once it's done with the tagging, it will go to the gazetteers and do everything that we've done essentially manually now. It will just do it automatically. So it's done. And you can see here, we now have 124 annotations. Let's look what they are. So the first thing you will notice, if I go to the coloring via status, they are all gray because they're all automatic matches. Now let's look at some of the places. Okay, so it has matched it actually correctly, so I can confirm. And this changes to green. Salzburg. My internet is getting slow. Or maybe you are probably.
Everybody's doing the same.
Okay. Yeah. And if you look at the map, let's see. Again, it's a messy process. It can produce pretty bad results. So let's see what happens if I go to the map view. Again, it's slowing down. But eventually it's going to load. Maybe we'll come back later. The server's not going to load it. Right. Maybe I'll give you, we're already doing the time. I also want to show briefly at least the image annotation tool. I would ask you again to go to /Reiner, and you should see a number of maps.
Can you try it on your other instance?
Yeah, probably.
Because
but on my other instance, I don't have the images there, but maybe yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah. So I'm going to the main instance. That's a little bit more powerful. It has more memory. I think that's usually the issue. But we'll do something very quickly. I've already created a folder. I'm going to show something else. So I don't have any map images in there. So therefore I need to upload something, and I will show you how you can quickly upload things to your own workspace. The easiest way is to simply do this via drag and drop. So here I have some map images. Let's maybe use this one because that's not so big. If you have a file, you can just pick it from your file explorer, drag it over there, drop it, and then it's going to upload. It supports pretty big maps. The map size isn't really an issue. We currently limit the uploads per user to 200 megabytes. That's just to protect ourselves mainly. So if you need more space, really just do get in touch with us and we can give you more space. Yeah, so it's uploading. And once the image is uploaded, I will share it with you, and then we can try the image annotation interface as well. Right, it's here. So this is what it looks like. It has been converted to a zoomable image, so you can zoom in, and it's a pretty high resolution image. So I'm now going to make this available to anyone. So as I said, I need to set this out of copyright. And we'll now share it with anyone on the web. So set. And if you now go to my workspace, in this case, it's a different workspace, you need to go to our main instance. That's the Pelagios.org. It's a different base, /Reiner. Then you should see this image. And in this case, this time I would ask you not to clone it, but actually try transcribing some place names on this. So we're going to do this together, and then we can see how more annotations become available. But in terms of how this works, it's a bit tricky at first, but I think people get used to it pretty quickly. So you have your annotation tools up here. You can either use this rechteck, the rectangle. Click once, drag with your mouse, click again, and then you can transcribe, and otherwise you just have the same things again. I'm trying to find a place that I can actually geo-resolve. Yeah, there is St. Wolfgang. I think it's not the St. Wolfgang of Austria because it's somewhere in Carinthia, a bigger place. Schwanberg. So in this case, I'll describe this. I would say it's a place. I have a match which is kind of weird. Let's see what this is. Schwanberg, Austria. Let's take a look at this one. Yeah, that looks good. I'll try a different base map here. OpenStreetMap so you can see. Yeah, so that looks pretty same. Let's take this one. And then if I go to the map, just like before, I have the image cut out and I have the geodata. Right, yeah, feel free to play with it a little bit, but I think we're actually running a bit late in time. Yeah, I think it's not through most of the things.
So placement of annotated this way, are you taking people with the already existing place that they are on with a Coquito, or how does it work? How can we save the annotations that we made?
You mean in terms of how you should annotate?
Yeah, I mean, we make all these annotations and how can I save the place?
You don't need to. As soon as you hit OK,
Okay.
it's being saved.
Okay.
There is a small notification at the top. Just can. If you look up here, while I'm writing a comment, it should say, so annotation saved. As soon as you've done that, it's fine. Right. Yeah, maybe the other tools you can explore yourself. There are some kind of weird tools which you probably won't find anywhere else. There's something called the tilted box. That is specifically for people annotating maps. If you click once, you can sort of get a baseline. And if you click again, you can define the height of the box. And then you can transcribe place name. The reason for this is that when you're working with maps, you often have this kind of tilted labels. And if you have this tool, you can, with 2 clicks, basically, you can mark the label, but you will also have the baseline. So you should use this baseline at the bottom of the text. So if it's sort of on its head, you can always use this tool to say, this is like the bottom of the text. So it gives some kind of extra information. And maybe other things that you can change the color so they can see things better. Right, but other than that, I think I'll hand over to you, Becca, with a small transition.
What Rainer showed with Recognito was a way of generating data. And I was looking at some of the documentation about the bigger picture discussions that have been going on here over the last couple of days. And I think that what I'm going to show now is more of an example of what a big picture tool that we developed could be. So Peripleo is essentially a linked data search engine. It was also part of the Pelagios project. And the essential idea was, how can we find a way to access all of the linked data that's out there that has geo information or geo data as a common element, and how could we represent that? And although what I'm going to show you now is material that is visualized on a map, it's actually quite important to break out of the map thinking, I think, when we consider Peripleo. It's a portal into a set of object data, which happen to have place as a common element, but what's more important is to think about it kind of horizontally as like a way of swimming through a mass of data rather than trying to pinpoint it to a particular place.
which is, by the way, the meaning of the name Peripleo.
Yeah, so I couldn't quite remember the translation, so if you can...
So Elton comes up with the names, it's Greek, and it's like to swim or sail through the ocean of information.
That's it. Thank you very much. I must tell the truth, we aren't doing any development on Peripleo as a tool at the moment. It really was developed as a proof of concept rather than as a standalone exist forever tool. But if anyone is writing grant applications and wants to write some linked data visualization aspect into their grant applications, you should come and speak to us. There are a couple of essential concepts behind Peripleo, which I think I'll go through first before we go into the demonstration. So the first is that when you search for objects in Peripleo, what you're going to find is a conflation of records. So every item that you find in the visualization is going to be a conflation of people, object, place data from different sources. So what this looks like in real life is this, a collection of records from different places, which if we have a look at the actual example of it, so this is how you enter into Peripleo. And if you want to do a search, this is one of my favorite searches. Search for the place Mainz. And what you find here are a whole range of different results. And it can be difficult at first to know which one you might actually be looking for. So I'm just going to go for the top one because it has the most sources. So if I have a look there, what I find is a visualization from Vici of a map with the name of the place. I also can see that there are 9 sources connecting, or 9 sources that reference that place, and 894 items that are linked to that place too. So one thing I can do is if you just click on that little logo there, you see the linked data view of that. So then you get the sense of what this conflation of sources is. And it gives you all of those different sources, and you can see the different matches that we have, which is quite a nice way, I think, of taking what can be quite difficult conceptual notions and really kind of pinning them down literally into a visual version. So that's the one view that you can get. You could also then start exploring via the objects. And that gives you a much better sense of what kind of things have been found. So for example, I think what I'm going to find there is a coin. There it is. I can jump through to the original source. So I can find that object and have a look at the source in this particular case, the numismatics.org database. Now, we talked about how it's a conflation of records that you're going to see when you look in Peripleo. As I mentioned, that conflation of records, and you can see the data structure behind it. The other thing that's important to remember is that what you see on the map as a dot does not mean that it's one record. These things are aggregations of related data rather than one dot equaling one hit. So if you think of it as facets rather than as objects, it makes it a little bit easier. Again, I think the Mainz example in this case can be useful. So if we look for the objects that are related to Mainz, what we can also do is we can filter those results because we might not be 100% sure of where we want the data to come from. So we filter it perhaps via the epigraphic database of Heidelberg because we're particularly interested in epigraphic data. And we can find what's there and click through and start exploring those data sources as well. The other thing that you can do when you are exploring your sources, you can see the extra ones. So you can choose which one you want. Obviously, in this particular case, we've got much more from Heidelberg than anywhere else. But the other option that you have is to filter your search by period. So you can use the slider here to just scroll around and filter your results, perhaps just like that. And then you can just clear it all as well. I just want to go back.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, this is the one thing that's always takes a little longer than it should. Because these are very long. So what we saw with the example of mines is that one place can have many associated items with it. The other possibility when you're looking for objects in Peripleo is you can have one object that has many places associated with it. So as part of the Pelagios III project, where we were annotating very particular objects, this example of the Carrello beakers, which are beakers which have inscriptions on them of a pilgrimage route from the 16th century, I think.
Fourth.
Something like that. What you can do is you can actually then track those routes through Peripleo, through that sense of through those associations with the objects, which is a slightly different approach, but shows that it's not helpful to think in a way that doesn't make allowance for that faceted aspect. The third point that kind of is behind the thinking of it is that location, the notion of thinking about locations versus connections. So what Peripleo allows you to do is to also search for what you might think of as kind of conceptual terms or less tangible materials. And this is an example that our colleague Valeria Vitale uses all the time. So she searches for crocodiles. Now when you search for crocodiles, you get two results. The one is a place, which has a gazetteer reference associated with it. The other is a set of texts. And if you were to click on one of the places, one of the facets there that is related to the set of texts, the result that you'll get is a snippet of an annotation which mentions crocodiles. So if the data is in here, then it's possible to search for kind of conceptual notions as well as specific things in Peripleo. Now, of course, the kicker when it comes to this is that the data needs to be in here, right? And if it isn't in here, then there's not a whole lot that you can do with it. And it's been really interesting, actually. I've used Peripleo with school kids who are desperate to find the village where Asterix lives, because in their head, like, that's what Roman stuff has. I've also worked with or done demos to high school students who have perhaps been to a particular museum and there is an object in that museum that they remember. They see the museum in the list of sources and they're determined to find that particular object. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It really does depend on what's in there. And so one way that you can also search in Peripleo is by source. And because of the history of the project and the way that the project has developed, we have a very particular set of sources. But it is possible to, perhaps, this is a good example. So the Archer archives, which are the archives of the American Numismatic Society. If I were to search only by that source, what I get is I can see there are 51 items there and they're linked to 26 places. And this is my favorite example from the Archer archives. This is a photograph of an olive tree, which is claimed to be the olive tree of Plato. And you can then see the photographs of the supposed olive tree, which was destroyed when a drunk tourist drove their car into it in the 1960s, which is somewhat unfortunate. But you can do a slightly more specific search in Peripleo, but again, it's much more helpful to think about it as a portal into a set of data rather than specifically a way to find singular objects on their own. Now, the thinking that we had behind Peripleo, and I think in part because of the thinking that was behind Recogito, we had tended to think in very specific terms of objects, places or people. But our colleague Carl Grossner at the World Historical Gazetteer has coined the term traces and has actually built on a lot of the work that's happened in Peripleo for the thinking behind the World Historical Gazetteer and their data model. And so a trace was originally thought of as a way of mapping a route, a flow, or a journey of an entity through history, time, and space. But now we're beginning to think of it more in terms of slightly more concrete objects as well, right? Like physical artifacts, literature, events. It's broad enough to be helpful and also not quite specific enough to nail you down to one specific thing, right?
Yeah, apparently we never really had a name for this. It's like something linked to a place.
Yeah.
And Carl has sort of refined it to more like a real concept of, let's say, every kind of human phenomenon or physical object in some way relates to it.
Yeah. And then I think because we've got a break coming up, what I might do is just show you one slide about the World Historical Gazetteer, and then we could take a break and then come back and we can get into the hands-on stuff of either Recogito or Peripleo, and then I can wrap up by doing a show of the story maps. Does that work for people? Okay, great. So yeah, just a bit more information about the World Historical Gazetteer. This is a massive project, and it's really exciting. A 3-year NEH project based at the University of Pittsburgh, which aims to be a data store and associated software and services for collaborative, data-driven historical scholarship at the global scale. So the focus is post-1500, which for us is really exciting because one of the difficulties we've had with Recogito and Peripleo is that our gazetteers for the most part have been limited to the ancient world. And that can make it really frustrating for early modernists, for example. And our response has always been, well, present us with a really good early modern gazetteer and we can start adding it in there. If anyone knows of any really good early modern gazetteers. Yeah. I mean, we do have the maps of early modern London is one of the gazetteers we use, but there's a huge demand for it, and so we're waiting. When we can find one more, we'll be very happy.
There's also quite, it's kind of different projects address so different granularity. Like there is this early modern London, which is really extremely detailed, but of course it's only for London. And we have a project which the Cassini surveys, I think, so that's like the French survey campaign, like 2 million places. So that's a project which has been going on. I mean, it's literally, it's the same project. So it's a 150 years project now, I think.
Yeah.
And they're collecting it now in GIS. But that's again, it's like a 2 million place name gazetteer, so that would sort of require a redesign of Recogito to support it. But there's so much, a huge spectrum and at different ends of the scale people are working on it. There is no sort of middle ground solution. So that's sort of just a challenge.
Yeah, and I think the World Historical Gazetteer will address some of this, but not all of it. And they have a very broad scope. So they've got materials from kind of colonial era Spain, the GIS de las Indias. Yeah. And they've also got China Historical Gazetteer. Yeah, exactly. So they have a much broader remit than we do, and it's really exciting to see what will come of this. Yeah, so I think maybe if we just spend like 10 minutes or so going through Peripleo in a slightly more demo way, and then a quick look at an example of a storytelling tool, the ArcGIS Story Maps. And what I'd really like to do with those is rather than walk you through how to use ArcGIS Story Maps, which is incredibly easy and very simple and has enormous amounts of support and guidance from them on how to use it. What I thought I would do is show you an example of a storytelling tool using maps and historical data using ArcGIS to rather give you an idea of the kinds of things that can be done. And then we can spend the last bit of time after that for any hands-on work that people want to do with Rainer and myself in the room. And then Rainer will, actually, Maybe what we should do is after ArcGIS, if you want to show what some other people have done with Recogito.
Sure.
Because it's the last session on the last day,
Yeah.
and it's very hot, and I don't want to force people to be here absolutely longer than they have to be here working on GIS layers.
But it's way cooler inside than
That's
compared
true.
to
Okay,
north outside. So let's just stay.
let's just stay a whole afternoon then.
I will throw you out at noon.
Teach.
Go away. Right, so if you want to have a look at Peripleo, that's the URL over there. And I thought what we could do is have a look at some various examples of things that you can search for. So if I just give myself my own directions here. So the one thing that you can do, as I said earlier, is you can search for a particular object in Peripleo. And one of the searches that we often use as an example is a tetradrachm coin type. You can already see that you get a lot of suggested results there coming up automatically, but if you don't go with any of those and you decide to do your own choice, you get a set of results. And you can then scroll through these. There's an enormous amount of them. And you can filter those by sources. You'll be able to filter them by periods as well. I like to generally look for examples from fewer sources rather than more, because it can be a little less overwhelming. So if we have a look at the results from the Fralin Museum, we can find one particular example there. Oftentimes what we find is that the images don't always come through if our partners haven't updated the API.
It's actually if they don't serve via HTTPS, if they don't have.
Right. Yeah. So that can, but generally what you should have is you would get a snippet there of the image, and then you can click through and explore those particular objects themselves. The other type that can be quite satisfying to search for, if inscriptions are your thing rather than coins, is to look for a slab. So here you're going to find all sorts of different results, and oftentimes what you see is quite strange results that pop up in the New World, which can, if you generally are aware that we tend to work with ancient world material, it can be a little disconcerting to see those, but often what these results mean is that materials are being kept in a repository or a collection at that location, and somehow that location data is showing up there. But generally, those can be filtered out. But here again, we have a set of sources, and you can see there the place that it's associated with. So you can search for the place, and then also see all of the other items that connect to that place, not just the slab that we originally searched for, but a bunch of other stuff too. You can scroll down and decide which one of those you might be interested in. What you could also do is search for a person. And much like the crocodiles example, searching for a person is probably going to give you quite a broad and less than specific result. Like, you're unlikely to find that person. But if you do a search for Severus Alexander, you will find various materials from various sources that are somehow related to him. And you can either explore those via the results on the left, or you can see what this might be. There we go. So again, this is an example of a result that's coming through from Herodotus. So that's why we have a polygon rather than a specific faceted dot. It's an annotation related to Severus. And probably, I would guess, the same with these ones here. Yeah, again, we have another annotation results. So you can scroll through and see which one of those you might want to explore a little bit further. The final example that I did want to show you was in the earlier result that I showed you from Mainz. There was one other element that I wanted to include here. So one of the things that you can do is see periods. Do you remember how to do this, Ryan, to see the different periods that are visible?
Should be periods, depends on whether the data includes references to periods.
Yeah.
The height of every period should
do it, right? No, not today. So if the original data source has a breakdown of periods, which are kind of somewhat more specific, like related to
usually the periods
of a particular emperor or a particular object, then you can actually see those too. And it's not like super clear here, but you can actually see a breakdown of it here in the slide. If you have a look at the bottom there under Mainz, then there's a little clock, and you can see that there are different periods listed with specific objects related to those periods there. So if the source has that information available, then you can also search by period using those facets down at the bottom. But I can't seem to locate those today. And then finally, while it's a lot of fun to swim around in Peripleo, what I would like to do is just show you another way of telling stories using this kind of data. So I think what Peripleo does a really good job of is introducing people to the concept of linked data and how it can pull together objects from a variety of different sources and a variety of different repositories through the one shared aspect of place. This is the thing that connects these things together. But another example of being able to tell these stories and create narratives out of these types of objects is using a tool called ArcGIS.
Sorry, can I just ask a question related to the Peripleo? See, do you actually have user data on what the people are using and what they are, how they are swimming through the data? Because that would be a really interesting to see what people actually look for, and if this complexity is reduced in a way that works for the users. That would be. We
don't. I mean, you don't even have to sign up.
Yeah.
Right. But cookies, or I don't know.
We don't. The key reason is really we have only developed it to a prototype. That was never so much. So we wanted to show stuff around ourselves. But yeah, we should.
Yeah, because I mean, I've used it before, but I never really delved into it in the way that you showed now. And as a interested casual user, I wouldn't have clicked on this items linked to this thingy, and I saw it for the first time. And now it completely makes sense. But I mean, basically, it's the question if I'm the only one who is stupid before and needs this kind of introduction.
No, I don't think so.
I think that was really the point why we developed it. We had this idea that you have linked data, but it's not really easy to access. And we tried to figure out how one possible way of presenting it could look like. And since Pelagios was about place, we knew it would have to be something like a map but it will also be like a network structure where you can follow links, and then we build something to show and explore it. And I think that's really just the first step in a way. And that's also, the usability, of course, is a thing that has never been explored formally. I think that's the step now. Now that we know what are the structures, how could we display it, now I think we need to get back to the drawing board essentially to find out how a real system would look like also. How will it work with distributed data sources, with bigger data sources like data, with big SSTs like the one from the Cassini survey. I think there's all sorts of things that will need to be discussed and decided based on the ideas. I think also, I mean, the Pittsburgh SST is the next step, but I think it's really a long road ahead.
The other thing that it's very valuable for is to convince cultural heritage institutes why they should go to all of this effort of converting their collection data to linked data in the first place. Yeah. Because I think, I mean, no disrespect to Europeana, it's an unbelievable resource.
And a mess.
But it's very difficult to search through. It's, I mean, as a casual user, it's difficult to search through. As someone with a little bit more specialist knowledge, it's still incredibly difficult to search through. And so one of the things we wanted to do was say to museums, archives, and other cultural heritage institutions, well, this is one way which you can start connecting your collections to other people's stuff, to show the visualization, to really have like a practical proof of what tools can do for this. And even though the response from cultural heritage institutions has been really good, it's still a massive hurdle for them to get there. Like it's not insignificant, and you've got some crazy emails of like really messy data sets that had a lot of work to be done.
It's the reality of metadata. It's always a mess. People have been collecting this since centuries, essentially. And now that's what makes it difficult to connect. It's not the technology, it's going through the metadata, it's the curation, it's the annotation. So that's the real big hurdle.
But we do have to find a way to show them that it's worth it. So this was a good way to start, at least for some collections.
And I think also in terms of showing that, you don't need to get everything done at once. We all said here, just start with a small data set, just start with only the places and connect something, make it sort of visualization.
Yeah. So maybe that would be the way to do it, would be to ask the institutions if their data is being pulled through Peripleo. Perhaps there's a way from their side that it might be possible to have a sense from the queries as to what users are wanting to do with that data or what they're searching for. Might be another way to do it that doesn't violate our very serious privacy and user privacy policies and beliefs.
Thanks.
Sure. Long answer to a short question. Yeah, so as Florian mentioned earlier, and one of the things that I mentioned earlier as well, telling stories with this kind of data is a useful way of proving to ourselves that there is a reason for doing some of this other than just digging through and playing with the data that we create, and that there are ways of telling stories with data that can kind of have a much broader appeal perhaps to researchers and scholars. So one of the tools that's very useful for this is ArcGIS Story Maps. It's a web-based application using the ArcGIS platform, and it allows you to create narrative maps and kind of multimedia publications, I guess is the best word, using the maps that you create or the data that you've generated from mapping tools like Recogito in very visually attractive ways. You can use the story builder to add texts and lists and images and videos, and you can publish those stories and then manage them. And I think rather than walking you through how to use it, because it is a very, very user-friendly tool, and depending on how complex you want your maps to be, you can either use all of the incredibly powerful tools that sit behind the ArcGIS system, so you can have like in-depth layers and complicated GIS data, or you can have much more, what's the word, lightweight visualizations of your data. I thought one of the things I would do is show you an example of a really beautiful set of story maps that were created by partners of ours at the University of Lancaster. So this project, Pathways to Understanding 16th Century Mesoamerica, is a project which was created by a group at Lancaster, and they've been annotating some of the 16th to 19th century maps that were created by the Spanish in Mexico. What's particularly interesting about some of these maps that they've been using is that they contain not only the colonial language and annotations, but they also contain some of the indigenous glyphs and textual elements from the indigenous communities who were part of these mapping and survey projects that were conducted at the time. And the other thing that they've been doing is that using Recogito, in fact, the group first annotated a series of these maps and then used the data that they extracted from Recogito in order to create these story maps. So this one traces toponyms. And what they've been able to generate using the data is this narrative around the map. So you start here and there's an introductory text and a visual example of the original map that they've been using. And then you can see an element of that map that's been included. And what the tool allows you to do is to link your text and elements of the images. So you can jump between them here. And then examples of the glyphs that have been used are there. And then you can also include other types of maps using the base maps that are provided by ArcGIS. So you can include those in your story map. And you can also have different geodata included in the visualization. So for example, in this case, the legend here gives you an example of what these different points on the map mean. And in this particular case, what they were looking for is examples of naming of places in the Nahuatl language, where different suffixes and prefixes of the words signify different meanings. So while you have the legend over there, what you can also do is give breakdowns. So here, for example, you see, okay, well, any word that ends with apan, meaning river, this is the location of a lot of these places. And you can click on them, and then you get the detail that was created from the annotation in Recogito of that particular place on the original map. Again, there's another set here using other suffixes. And here, a lot more. And here too. So what the group did is using a set of sources, including the maps that they'd scanned, and then added, no, I think I actually used IIIF manifests to import those maps. Yeah. They were able to generate that data in Recogito and then move it across using ArcGIS to create these maps. And then, again, these incredibly beautiful visualizations from these ancient maps. You can see the map, and then they also have examples of the glyphs which are contained within the map. So you can see the difference between the colonial and the indigenous naming of these places. And then another aspect of this particular map that I like is they then found examples of where these glyphs have been repeated using the metro map of Mexico City, which is a very complicated metro system. But they were able to trace back and see in the original maps where those glyphs had been used before and where they're now being used as the names of subway stops in the metro system. So you can click on the name of the place, you see the glyph. So really what this is an example of is how the data can be, is really only the starting point, I think, for a set of storytelling tools that can be used to tell quite powerful narratives around spaces and places. And you can include map visualizations, you can include visualizations that have been generated out of your data, and then you can also choose, you can also use elements that have been taken from other sources. So here, for example, a blog that they used as a source. The final thing that I just wanted to show you is that if you do decide to use story maps, while each story map gets a unique URL and it can exist on the web as long as the platform exists, it's not a very pretty one. It's not particularly handy or useful. So what the group here did was that they added their resources to Figshare and gave it a DOI so that it's a little bit more persistent and easier to cite and easier to find. So this is also an example of a tool that can be used to generate your narratives. But do you want to maybe then have a look at some Recogito, some other Recogito results, and then we can let people work on the tools as they want?
Yeah, there were two things I wanted to show. One, just simply go through some things that the community has created with Recogito, also as an inspiration of what others do. And then I remember I wanted to talk a little bit about what you can do with spreadsheets in Recogito. If you have a spreadsheet with place names and you want to get coordinates. But so again, that's the central instance. Yeah, we've seen this kind of in Peripleo that they have an object that sort of has reference to many places. That's obviously the use case for Recogito. And some people have created some interesting or annotated some interesting documents. Some we've done ourselves actually in the very early phase of the project, and that's, let's see this one here. So we've worked a lot on itineraries, that's sort of medieval or also from Roman times basically. Travel reports or travel literature, or sometimes very formal documents. This, for example, is a travel itinerary from Bordeaux in France to the Holy Land and back again, and it's literally like a list of places. So here's a stop, here's a stop, here's a stop, here's something to change horses, here's a place where you can stay overnight and things like that. It's like a register. And if you start mapping this and annotating it, it's really nice that this comes out very clearly. So the actual road that was taken, and if you look at this with a base map of Roman roads, you can see exactly the kind of roads that they followed. Also, what's nice here is just to see sort of how roads sort of would follow the terrain. We also had a student project once where they used actually a 3D map to plot ancient itineraries with the topography. So it's also pretty nice to explain to students how the roads were designed to follow the easy ways and things like that. Pretty much obvious, but they are sometimes hard to show in a nice way and in an engaging way to students. So that's one thing. Another thing which the map can show nicely is you have different coloring options. And if you color it by part. So the document comes in 12 chapters, or in 11 chapters, and you can see exactly by the color which places are in which chapter. The white dots appear in multiple chapters. So that's sort of the starting point, or that's an important point, which, yeah, that's Bordeaux. It's usually probably in the last chapter when they come back, or in the first chapter. For collaborative work, it's also quite nice that you can show this by contributor. In this case, it's all done by Paul De Soto, who was our postdoc back then.
It's one little orange.
And yeah, he's the project lead. You always have to leave one comment probably somewhere. Right. Other documents. So that's the same document from a different user. We haven't really started to explore what we can do with different versions of the same source. But here you can see one thing mostly, that this user has actually finished the job. So he's done the way to the Holy Land and back again, and also been doing the regions more thoroughly. So I think there's also something really special about Recogito, that people work on the same sources, but personally in their own workspace. And I think there's something to be gained in the future to merge the work and to look at the same sources from the perspective of different people. Yeah, maybe some examples of images. Again, initially starting with something that we've done in our own project, but through a colleague from the British Library. So we've scanned some maps that had not been digitized yet. One of the things was this atlas here, the Benincasa Atlas. It's a fairly small atlas with a couple of pages. It's actually, in reality, it's a bit more pages than that, but we don't have all of the Recogito. It's the Mediterranean, and it's a special type of map which is called a Portolan chart. If you haven't seen it before, it's like the closest thing to a pirate map that exists, I think. It's visually really pleasing. And what's special about them is they were used for navigation. So they were really only interested in the coastlines, and they were interested in landmarks. So you can see these little dots here, for example. That means there's shallows, or whatever you call this. So it's unsafe. Yeah, exactly. So there's these kinds of things, and the rest are safe anchorages and whatever. And the rest is just place names, and the place names are just lined up one after the other. So this is a really rich source also for the study of the history of place names on the coast, because people who have been, so historians who specialize, have told us that in the Mediterranean, specifically when tourism started, all the place names got devastated, basically, it all got lost. And so these charts, which are from the 14th, 15th, 16th century, they are really a rich source for toponymy. And in this case, yeah, the colleague from the British Library has gone and transcribed every single one. We could not map all of them to modern coordinates, so that's simply not possible because also the gazetteers are just not that detailed, but at least everything is transcribed. So I think it's more than 2,500 toponyms in total. So on this sheet you have this 574. And yeah, it's another 800. So that's sort of really meticulous work. And again, if you look at the map view, that's quite interesting. On the one hand, you can see exactly this kind of trend that people, of course, they focus on the coastline. In here, I think the most useful thing again is to color them by part. The part is the atlas page, so you can see exactly which atlas page was concerned with which region. And again, the most interesting things are the white dots, which means that the place is mapped on multiple pages. And also the size is interesting because the size means there are multiple annotations. In this case, this has 2 annotations, and you can quickly compare the images and also the translation, the transcription. So in this case, there are completely different spellings, Quartetti and La Palostra. For some reason, the person who annotated it considered it to be the same place. So we don't know whether it's true, but the interpretation says, yeah, that was the same place. And you can compare it. And again, also I should say, everything you do in Recogito gets timestamped, and it gets stamped with the username, so it's always kind of traceable who has said what. Maybe we'll find the example of, yeah, so here you have the actual name variant, but again, you have different images from different pages where this appears. So again, it gives you a way to quickly compare between different spelling variants, between different manuscript hands. Another example, maybe. That's an interesting one I'd like to show. So Recogito is really bad as a transcription tool, but nonetheless, people sometimes do actual documents of transcription with it. So here you have a papyrus written in Greek. So the user has, she's transcribed parts of the papyrus. What's interesting here is this is, I think, poetry. So for poetry, you often have canonical identifiers. We can't really link them up directly, but so they've used the tagging to refer lines to canonical identifiers. Also, of course, they've made use of the geotagging feature in some case where this is sort of useful or where this makes sense. And also, in this case, that's also interesting. So that's the person, or that's a person. They've used the name as a tag, but also because we can't link to a prosopographic dictionary, they've again tweaked or made a workaround by simply pasting the URI, in this case to Wikipedia, which gives them an actual identifier for the person. So you can hack the system in a way to make up for the deficiencies that currently exist. Right. I think that's some of the more interesting cases. Yeah, then, as I said, I wanted to show how you can work with spreadsheets. So this is really sort of a very beta functionality. We started in the beginning to implement this, but never really finished it in a way. I'm going to show this on a data set from a colleague called Sebastian Heath. He works again as he's a classicist. Just deleting all the annotations that exist here. So it's ancient world data, it's ancient Rome. In this case, it's a spreadsheet of something like 250 amphitheaters. So Sebastian had a spreadsheet. He recorded all the names. What he didn't have in this case, okay, in this case they were actually latitude and longitude. But let's assume we have a spreadsheet which doesn't have latitude and longitude, and we want to get coordinates. So what you can do there's something called automatic matching. And then you can pick a place name column. Let's say we want to use the title. Well, that's the label. Because the label column is where we have recorded our place names. And we want to use Recordable simply for the boring task of looking up every place name in the spreadsheet and giving me a reference back. And I want this to work just on the Pleiades gazetteer, because it's a gazetteer for ancient Greece and Rome. And that will probably give me fewer false matches if I restrict the matching just to Pleiades. So let's just start this. And then it will go take every place name from the label column and it will give me a match. You can see already it has found some matches. Pretty much a good result. So there are few missing. Again, these are all unconfirmed. So I can click on them and say, okay, so that's yeah, works. And so I only need to check. Rather than dig up the coordinates myself, I can let the computer do the first pass and then just do the matching and confirmation. It doesn't look that good. No, it is actually. And again, you can instantly see the first result. It looks good. It looks at least constrained to the area where we would expect amphitheaters to be. It's probably a false match here because it has two matches, but in our spreadsheet, it might actually be okay. Military and civilian. So that's a way to pretty quickly get coordinates for a spreadsheet if you have it, and then you can move the spreadsheet out again. In the download options, you will have then something which is called a merged CSV, which simply means that it's your original spreadsheet with all the columns that you had in there, but there are extra spreadsheet columns which Recogito adds to your spreadsheet. And if you look at that, it looks like Excel never does that. So I think start with an empty one. from CSV. Downloads. I think it should give me more options now. Yeah. So here's my spreadsheet. It looks just like it used to, with all the columns that Sebastian had in there initially. But in the end, here's some extra columns which says Recovito URI. It's the Gazette URI that Recovito identified, and latitude and longitude. So, but again, in the original, those are actual numbers, but Excel's like this. Yeah. Let's see. Just to prove it, it has to be, should be correct, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so here are the latitude and longitude. Excel probably thought it's a date, as usual. It would also add tags if you want to add tags and comments. So everything comes out basically. Right. I think that's actually everything that we wanted to get through in this session.